Welcome to Minerva, a monthly show where we discuss the mysteries. We hope to give you enough information that you can go away and do your own study. Now, because of COVID-19, today we're filming from home, but we're really excited to bring you an episode about the Lost Relics of the Knights Templar. Now, I first heard about this show about 5 or 6 years ago when another researcher gave me a call and told me that he had been to see some swords. Now, these things pop up from time to time and, there are a lot of fakes out there. However, he seemed pretty excited by the prospect. So we've waited and waited and waited, and finally the show came. I was sent a press pack, and we've also been in contact with the gentleman who owns the Horde. So we've got some inside information which we may be able to bring you throughout this show. But the show went out about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it only aired in the UK and some of Europe, so there are plenty of people in America who have yet to see it. Now, before we start, I need to say that I've binge-watched the whole lot. I've seen the whole 5 episodes. They are going weekly, but you can download them if you've got Sky or Virgin or something like that. So I've managed to see them a couple of times. And also, Duncan, my co-host, has seen them as well. So, Duncan, let's start off with your thoughts on the show.
Right, okay. Hello, everyone. Hello, Dan. Right, this is the first part. We're just going to talk about the show, not so much of what we feel about the artifacts or the stuff. This is just a commentary on the show. To be honest, I found it hard going to get through, but I think that was personally mostly due to my expectations. I mean, I thought I'd prep myself in the same way as we do with most of the things we do. We read a book, and if we're interested in it, we buy another one, and we know that part of that book's going to be a copy of the original material, because you need that backstory perpetually coming through with every book you buy. But of course, the more you get into a subject, you end up buying books with just that one line that is new and exciting to go through. So I prepared myself to watch a lot of stuff that I kind of already knew one way or the other. But to be honest, the thing that was harder about it was it felt quite disjointed. It felt like I wasn't sure if I was watching a travel show. I wasn't sure if I was just watching an interview about 2 guys who had a lot of money, and one guy was talking about his bikes and we're talking about cars. I didn't mind because we were going to actual locations, but I wasn't bothered about what some guy had in his glove box or what they're chatting about when they're driving along the road. I was really getting into, you got a treasure, tell me about the treasure, where it all is. And that didn't happen. And I don't know why. I don't know if they were trying something new or they were trying to get more people interested in it, but I found it hard going to watch. So that's the first criticism I had. The second criticisms are going a lot more about the content, in the sense of one of the major parts was to just do one item per show, where there's meant to be, I think what they said was it over 70, 190 or something like that. And now there's only going to be 5. We're watching one show per item. It was, if you're not interested in a chalice, then that's your program pretty much gone. I would have been far more entertained if they did 2 items, something that might be a bit more academic and something that would be exciting, like the sword and maybe something like a chalice. So that didn't quite rock my boat either. And my last part is going to be, I think, what most people do when you're looking at, we wanted the credibility factor to be put in. And with the expectation was there, they did have, was it Dan Jones, as there's like the independent person with them? But that wasn't as professional or as engaged as I was expecting it to be. For instance, there's one point where I think Dan Jones is trying to verify something by, he goes from a library, pulls out a book and keeps saying, this is an old book, this is like 100 years old, and this is telling you about, and he's listing the stuff that was at the Temple Church in London when the Templars were taken from there. And my head's already going, well, if that book's only 100 years old, then that's only to the 1920s. So that's still over 500 years after the event actually happened. You wouldn't have Richard Attenborough telling around using such a flimsy thing unless he was backing up like, this book is a reproduction of so-and-so. That information just wasn't there. But I suppose just for a final point, and again, another peculiarity I found in the presentation of the show was, again, relates to the same guy. And when he first sees the treasure, he suggested there's only two things you can actually do. You can either take it to a museum and have them research it, or do it yourself. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, actually, no, you've got one practical option. You do both. You give the stuff over to a museum so they could do the real academic side of it, which isn't just testing about the metals or the composition of it. You've got the museums all linked together with databases, and so if they have something obscure, then they can put on the database and go, right, guys, we've got this. Has anybody got anything similar? And you'll get Tel Aviv come through, or you get someone in Istanbul and say, well, actually, yeah, we've got one of these. It was dug up here. That's valuable stuff of why it goes through for museum testings. But also as a case of you could have done two things. They could have done that. The passionate researchers could have gone off and done their research. And to be honest, I would have loved the idea of them, both the academics and the researchers, coming back at the end of the program, turning around and saying, okay, we've found this is what we think, or this is what we've done, we think. And that would have been a great show. Further, that sounds concept of a show, and I think of the credibility of this whole, is this the real treasure of the Templars? But anyway, that's my first bit of critique. What about you, Dan? What do you think?
Well, I expected to see The Curse of Oak Island, and for anyone that knows that show, it is very long and very, very drawn out. So I was surprised, actually. It felt more British, it felt more to the point, and I really enjoyed that part about it. For me, it was better quality, and I didn't mind the travel, actually. I felt the travel was quite interesting. It took me to places I hadn't been, it showed me some other things, and for me it was quick enough. Now, I think what we've really got to realise about this is if you're interested in the Templars, if you're a historian, you've been doing your research, you're a Rennes le Chateau aficionado, you're really into this stuff, then this isn't for you. The show isn't aimed at you. You're not the demographic. Even though you feel that you might be, History Channel have got to sell adverts. And I think to get their ad revenue, they've got to bring in the general public. I think that's why we see Nazi stuff in there. I think because that's just a big seller for the History and Discovery Channel, etc. I think that's why it's really wide-ranging as a show. They're trying to do the travel. They're talking about the bikes and the cars, etc., etc., because they're trying to make entertainment. They're not making a serious documentary on the Knights Templar and, the historic study of them. So for me, it was what I was expecting, but I was quite happy with the result. I liked it, and, I really am interested in what will move forward. So, to continue our conversation on this, I think we've got to really discuss the story. What actually happens? So if you haven't seen the show yet, the story all hinges on this one incident, which is in the 1960s, where three guys are digging and they find a hoard of treasure. They find two hoards, actually, right next to each other. Now, they relieve these chests of this stuff and they sell them on the open market, or the black market, so to speak. They go into private collections. Now, fast forward to about 7-8 years ago, Hamilton White, who is the owner of the hoard, finds out about one of these chalices. He travels quickly to Portugal to go and find it and strikes a deal to actually buy it. In buying it, he says, look, I'm interested in this stuff. I would love to, find more of it and add more to this collection. Can you help me? So the guy he buys it off does some work. They put some information together. And over the next 7 years, Hamilton goes away and he starts piecing together this hoard one by one. Now, for me, that part of the story is incredibly plausible. The more I think about it, the more I think that it is so much more likely to have been discovered by grave robbers or by people digging than it is expert in the Knights Templar who happens to pinpoint on a map through all of his research the exact spot where it was actually buried. So for me, I think it feels really authentic, and it certainly feels authentic that it goes into private collections as well. Now that doesn't mean that it's real, it's the right stuff, it isn't the right stuff. At the moment, we're just going to discuss that part of the story. So, Duncan, what are your thoughts on the story? Is it plausible?
Well, I kind of got a catchphrase on this, isn't it? The sense of anything's possible, but the question is it probable? I think one of the things that seems evident from the show, and even with the little extra information that we've got, is there is very little information about what happened in this apparent thing that happened in the 1960s. It seems that I think you're right. I think there is a case of I agree with the concept of grave robbers. I believe it is the information that he's put forward and the little things that hinted in there that some of the less fortunate of the region during the 1960s were aware they've got Roman graves around there. There's going to be gold in there. So rob the graves, get the gold. Bob's your uncle, you got some money. But my big thing is I don't actually believe it's a horde of separate things. I mean, even you say to yourself that there's a case of there was two hordes found very close to each other. If someone was hiding this, you dig one hole, you put the stuff in, you go away. Why dig two? Why do that? I mean, yeah, okay, maybe it's a case of, well, if one finds one, he doesn't find the other. To me, what I think we're looking at is not so much a Templar horde of something being hidden. I see it's more of a case of the grave robbers did find graves. It wasn't Roman. It was from the Templar side of things. But these are artifacts that are taken from a grave. Now, for me, that's why there's this question mark over what happened in the 1960s, and also why the information isn't so forthcoming from the people who are pointing the collectors in the direction. It's because, we were robbing graves, and this was from a grave, and everyone's a bit cautious about this concept. But I don't actually believe it's actually buried, hoarded stuff, as it were. I think it's actually artifacts from two graves close to each other. They wanted Rome and wanted gold, and they didn't. They just got a couple of jars. That's my thought. Sorry, Dan. I'm the cynic. Over to you.
Well, for me, Tomar feels right, actually. The Templars were allowed to exist there for longer than they were anywhere else in Europe, so it feels that that's the place, if there was lost treasure or if there was private items within the order, that they would take it. The other thing which this links into, which is really quite interesting for me, is that we know the story of La Rochelle, where the last Templar boats their fleet left La Rochelle, and where did they go? And there's always been that question. Some people believe they went to Edinburgh and they went to Roslin Chapel. Others believe Oak Island in Nova Scotia. Now, for me, Nova Scotia is a very long way, and it's certainly a long way to go on, a moment's notice. Edinburgh, likewise, is a long way, and it also means you've got to go round the English Channel and through that and up and round into. It seems like a really odd route to take unless you're really specific about where you're going. However, Tomar is on pretty much the same coastline. It's not very far, but it's just the distance you would need to go because you know that you would be safe there. It's almost the closest and the most safe place. So for me, that feels like the perfect place for it to have gone. Now, the other thing is, we talk about the Horde and whether or not, it was right and why would they hide this stuff. They were expecting the Inquisition, the Spanish were coming and there was going to be lots of issues. Now, for me, it feels like this stuff, and looking across all of the items, and I've seen many of them because we've been very lucky to be given more information than was on the television show. We've seen probably about 20, 25 of the items. They are all completely different. And again, you can see that on the show. There's swords, there's stonework, there's lots of different things. And it feels to me like this is a collection of stuff that had Templar insignia on it that they wanted to hide. They felt, we've got to get rid of this stuff, it can't be seen, but it's really valuable to our order. Although it's not valuable necessarily to anybody else, it's just sentimental value. Even in the 60s when it was dug up, I think the grave robbers, and as we know from the television show, they say they peel out the gold off of pieces because to them they were looking for gold, they were looking for treasure, but they weren't looking for these types of items. So it had a very small value then because they didn't know the worth, they didn't know that it was Templar. The Horde was together for me, and it was probably laid into two different graves or two different places because of just pure space. Now, I think once it came out of the ground, it was split three ways. We hear that the story of there's three people, and I think it was probably split in three different ways. We know that as well in many senses because some of it is as if it's come out of the ground. It's still got foliage on it. It's still covered in muck, etc. Others are completely over polished, so some of it looks like it's it's been treated to make it look better, so that they could kind of sell it on. So for me, I think the Horde is right. Tomar's probably the right place for it to be. It's a fascinating story. But one thing I am interested in, Duncan, is your opinion on what is your favourite part of the Horde?
Well, firstly, I think I think you're inspired with the idea of Tomar being the location after La Rochelle, and I think you're right. I think we see so much in the program where they're talking about its spiritual value, or it was played an important part in a ritual. I think you're closer to the value. If it was buried for a reason, maybe because of the Spanish Inquisition, I think you're right. I think it's because this is the treasure that's survived from Paris. There is that intrinsic emotional value to it, because I think even the gold that would have been beforehand might have even gone. But anyway, to your actual question, the artifacts, my favourite. I think for most boys, it'll be the sword. I know they say that they feel a vibe of the sword. Now, I'm not a great believer in that. I think it's far more the case as just something about it's inherent. Like if you picked up a rifle, you knew it was carried at the Somme, or an arrowhead that was a little bighorn. There's just something about feeling an artifact that you knew that had such a destructive purpose. There is just something that's captivating by that idea. That'd be the top one. The other two, I suppose, I've thrown a disclaimer. One, because people haven't watched the rest of the episodes going on, but also the information that's been fortunate enough to be passed on to us. And one is one of the jars, one of the cups, and is starting to apparently secrete a little oil, which to me, my God, that's just got to go off and get tested to see what this oil actually is. Because, of course, it's something that's something's been held in that cup. I'd love to think it's been the reason it's gone into the material itself is because it was done so often, and so therefore it's just as the temperatures changed, it started to leak out. I mean, what would be that? What would be that liquid? What is it? So I'll be fascinated to see what happens with that. But my favourite items out of the Horde, which, again, we're so lucky because of the information that's been given to us, there is so much scepticism I could throw to the Horde being Templar. I mean, is literally just the crosses, which are not, they are Templar, but I have seen them being used by other orders. But there's two artifacts that we know of that they've sent us the information on that, to me, say, my God, that if anything proves or gives us the strongest evidence that this is Templar, are these two artifacts, which we're lucky enough just to see photographs of. They're not in the TV series, and they are two alabaster jars, which are unique in their design in the sense of we don't know what they're for. There's got a little, they're reconstructions of little temples where the doorway is cut out. The floor of the jar is angled, so whatever is dropped in slides out of the doorway. The lid of it is quite snug. The walls of it are peculiar in the sense of how thick they are. But the most significant factor about these jars is they are replicas of Templar churches, which are so distinct in the sense of being round with the 8 pillars. These are Templar artifacts in the sense that these are little temple models. And so to me, that no matter what you put in front of me, if anything says this is Templar, it's this, because it's far more unique to me than the actual crosses. They're my favourite artifacts. I'm so sorry, guys, you haven't seen them yet, but fingers crossed. What about you, Dan? Your favourites?
Well, for me, I think it's got to be the sword. There's something about swords that are just, that really scream Templar. They're really intriguing. The thing I like about this one in particular is if you look on the pommel, there's a sort of scratch or a mark across the insignia, and it really feels like it's battle worn. I'd love to see further testing on that. I'd love to see some more information on that because, we love talking about this stuff and we're really into mysteries, but neither of us are experts on the Templar. And if you were to give me a real Templar sword and a fake Templar sword, or any number of iterations in between that, I wouldn't have a clue. I don't know. I'm not somebody that's going to be able to prove this stuff is real or not real. So I'll be led by expertise and science, etc. But from a mystery element, I really enjoy that sword. I think it's a great piece of history if everything checks out and it is correct. So that's probably my favourite item, although very close is the mixing vessel, which is shown in the television programme. It really gives us so much to think about, because were the Templars using hallucinogens or some kind of drugs to enhance their ceremonies? We know that all over the world that's been done with shamans, it's been done with lots of different tribal ceremonies. And were the Templars using something that was to help their ceremonies or to make them feel closer to God, etc., etc., etc.? So that's something that really connects with me and makes me feel that could be very, very special. It's got heads on it which are said to be John the Baptist. They look kind of right, but again, I'm not a historian, I can't tell. So for me, just looking at these things is really interesting and fantastic, and I like to kind of put myself in a situation where they were being used and how they were being used. But that brings us on to kind of what's next. What's next for this Horde? What's next for the story? Because it hasn't finished. We don't know if there's going to be a second series yet. That has not yet been confirmed. I'm in contact with Hamilton, who is still talking to the History Channel. Everything's good there. I think the show's been a smash hit, so there's a very good chance that they'll be interested in doing something else. And for me, I'd really like to see that. We've started a Facebook group about this, so just go and look for the show title on Facebook if you want to join us. And there's lots of chat in there. And one of the questions I asked recently was, would you like to see a second series? And it was, unanimous. People want to see this. They want more. They want to see, like you, Duncan, more items, and they want to know more about the story. They want to see some more historical research into this and see, where it can go. And for me, that's where it's got to go next. We've got to see more historical research. We've got to see the artifacts coming into their own and finding out the individual stories of those. And in person, away from the television show, I would love to see an exhibition. And I also know the owner would love to be able to do that. Now, we know prior to COVID-19 that there was going to be a short kind of exhibition and a show launch at Freemasons Hall in London, which would have been fantastic. It would have been the perfect place to have done it, and it would have really have brought some more publicity to the show. Not that it necessarily needed it, but I think that would have been a fantastic place for people to go and actually see the stuff, maybe put hands on it and actually start to look at it themselves, which is so important. So for me, those are the next steps. That's what I would like to see. But what about you, Duncan? Have you got any other thoughts?
All right. Yeah, the next stage. The obvious one is we've been invited down to have a look at the collection ourselves. What a coup! What a thing to be invited down to see. So yeah, to actually put your hands on that sword and have a look at close, especially those the artifacts we've been mentioned. But for the more general thing, for the sense of a second series, yes, I'd love to see it. There is so much more to find out. Obviously, I'd like to see it with a slightly different format, less of chat about cars and the travelling part. I know you liked it. I'm not a fan of it myself. 2 items instead of 1, so we can get more into looking what the collection actually is, and indeed looking into this background story of how these things were pieced together. How do we know it's of the same Horde? All this information that I think people are eager to know. And I think if they don't answer it, the general public will be more dubious about it, because these are obviously screaming questions that are going out. One other thing I'd like to see happen was another little bone of contention I had was there was the iron box. We saw it and we've seen the photographs of it. But one of the things saying, you see at the first 2 legs at the front, there were 2 knights, obviously. But then he would turn the box around and say, and this is Jesus and this is Mary, and you can see his thorns. But we never got to see it. And even in the photographs we've seen, he doesn't actually, I want to have a close-up of that. It's like when you and I, or anybody else does a presentation and say, right, in this work of art, I see this, you do a nice close-up of that, and you go, yeah, so what do you think? But when they did it to us in the TV program and in the information you've given to us, There's no clear close-up picture of saying, well, how do we know that's Jesus? I've only got your word for it. He's got a crown of thorns. I'd like that little bit more detail in the presentation of things. But to conclude, I wasn't expecting much from the show. I wasn't expecting to enjoy it. I was prepared for it. And even though I have far more questions than I have answers, there is enough in there that has got this cynic actually quite tantalized to find out more. As I said, there's 2 alabaster jars, and there's little snippets that goes through that just piques my curiosity that, there's more here to find out. And so I'd love to see a second series. I'd love to see some of these questions answered. So that's me. What about you then, Dan?
Well, look, you know me. I want to believe. I love these kind of mysteries. I find them really intriguing. I've been really excited about this show and this horde for quite a while. So, my final thoughts really are, I hope everybody can view this through the lens that's intended. This is an entertainment TV show at the end of the day, so I think there are going to be different peaks and troughs within it. However, do go away and do your own study. In talking to the Horde's owner, he's really open and wants to hear lots of people's theories. He's certainly a member of our Facebook group that you can join, and he's a member of our Facebook group, Minerva, as well. So like and subscribe us here and go and check us out on Facebook, so you can continue your study and continue looking for anything that can help out this mystery, because that's where this has now got to go. I really hope there will be a second series. I hope that we can find out more about this horde, and I hope that we can go and film an episode of Minerva actually live with Hamilton and with some of the items. That would be fantastic. So thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again very soon.